The diner was nearly empty except for a few late-night regulars, the hum of the coffee machine filling the quiet air. I wiped my forehead with the back of my sleeve, exhaustion weighing on my shoulders. My shift was almost over, and soon, I'd be racing across town to the night shift at the warehouse. My life wasn't supposed to be like this. At 18, I should have been in a college dorm, pulling all-nighters to cram for exams, not stacking boxes at 3 a.m. and flipping burgers at noon. But life had other plans. When my dad got sick, everything changed. Medical bills piled up, and my mom, God bless her, tried to hold everything together, but it wasn't enough. College dreams didn't matter when the electricity bill was overdue, and my little sister needed school supplies. So I stepped up. 2 jobs, barely any sleep, and a future that felt more like a distant dream than a reality. I never told my grandfather, the Richard Dawson. He wasn't just rich. He was stupidly rich. The kind of man who could drop $1 million on a whim and not bat an eye. But he and my dad never saw eye to eye. He believed in earning your place, and my father, proud and stubborn, refused to take a dime from him. That left me out of his world. A world of private jets, luxury cars, and 5-star vacations. And I was fine with that. Until the day he walked into the diner. I was so tired I didn't even notice at first. But then I felt it, the weight of his stare. When I looked up, there he was, sitting in the booth like he owned the place. His suit was crisp, his watch probably worth more than my entire year's salary. And his piercing blue eyes studied me like I was a puzzle he couldn't quite figure out. I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting into knots. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. He just slid a newspaper across the table. My name was circled in red ink under the section titled, "Local Teen Balances 2 Jobs to Keep Family Afloat." I felt the blood drain from my face. Busted. I gripped the edge of the table, my pulse pounding. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed above us, but the silence between my grandfather and me was louder than anything. "So," he finally said, his voice steady, measured. "This is what you've been doing instead of going to college?" I swallowed hard. "I don't have a choice." His gaze didn't waver. "Everyone has a choice." I let out a bitter laugh. "Not when your family is drowning in medical debt. Not when your little sister needs new shoes and your mom is working double shifts just to keep food on the table." His expression remained unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes. I couldn't tell if it was disappointment, frustration, or something else entirely. "You didn't think to ask me for help?" he asked, tapping the newspaper with a single finger. I clenched my jaw. "Would you have given it?" He didn't answer immediately, and that was all the confirmation I needed. I grabbed the rag from my apron and started wiping the counter, hoping he'd just leave. But of course, my grandfather wasn't the type to let things go. "You know your father was the same way," he said, watching me closely. "Too proud to ask for help. Too stubborn to admit when he needed it." I snapped. "Maybe he just didn't want to owe you anything." The words were out before I could stop them, and for a split second, I saw something crack in my grandfather's expression. But just as quickly, it was gone. "You think working yourself to the bone is the better alternative?" he asked. "I think doing what's necessary for my family is the right thing to do," I shot back. He studied me, his fingers tapping against the table in a slow, deliberate rhythm. "You're throwing away your future, Jake." I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. "What future? College isn't an option. We can't afford it. And I don't have time to sit in a classroom when my family needs me now." His gaze hardened. "You think this life is sustainable? Running yourself into the ground for pennies?" I didn't answer. Because deep down, I knew he was right. The exhaustion was catching up to me. The sleepless nights, the aching muscles, the constant stress, it wasn't sustainable. But what choice did I have? Before I could respond, my manager, Rosa, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, stepped up behind me. "Everything okay here?" she asked, eyeing my grandfather suspiciously. I nodded. "Yeah, we're fine." She wasn't convinced. "You sure? Because this isn't the kind of place for suits like him." My grandfather chuckled, amused. "And what kind of place is this, exactly?" Rosa folded her arms. "The kind where people work hard for a living." I shot her a grateful look before turning back to him. Look, Grandpa, I appreciate your concern, but I don't need a lecture. I need to get back to work. For the first time, his mask slipped. His lips pressed into a thin line, and there was something in his expression that almost looked like regret. He stood, adjusting his cufflinks. Fine, he said. If this is the life you've chosen, so be it. I should have felt relieved that he was leaving. But instead, there was a strange heaviness in my chest. Just before he walked out the door, he paused. I hope you know what you're doing, Jake. I didn't respond. Because the truth was, I didn't. And as I watched him disappear into the night, I had a sinking feeling that this wasn't over. I tried to push the encounter with my grandfather out of my mind, but it lingered like an unwelcome shadow. For the next few days, I stuck to my usual routine: diner shift in the morning, a couple of hours of rest, then back to the warehouse at night. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. But something had changed. My grandfather's words echoed in my head. You're throwing away your future, Jake. I wanted to ignore him. I wanted to believe that I was doing the right thing. But doubt started creeping in. Then, on my way to the warehouse one night, something unexpected happened. I walked into the break room, still wiping the grease from my last shift off my hands, when I heard my name. Hey, Jake. My coworker, Mario, waved me over. You got a visitor. I frowned. Visitors? I didn't have visitors. When I stepped inside, I froze. Sitting in one of the metal folding chairs, dressed in another ridiculously expensive suit, was my grandfather. What the hell? I muttered under my breath. He looked up, smirking. Charming as ever. I sighed, tossing my bag onto the table. Why are you here? To see for myself. He gestured around. This is your second job? I crossed my arms. Yeah. And? He leaned back. And I wanted to see how long you planned on killing yourself like this. My patience snapped. Look, I don't have time for this. I have a shift to start. I already spoke to your supervisor, he said casually. My stomach dropped. You what? I wanted to understand why my grandson, who has the brains to be anywhere else, chooses to work in places like these instead of pursuing something better. My fists clenched. Because this is real life. Not everyone gets to sit on piles of money and pretend like the rest of us don't exist. He studied me, his gaze sharp. So you're doing this out of pride? Just like your father. I stepped forward, my voice low. I'm doing this because my family needs me. Something shifted in his expression. And what if I could change that? I frowned. What? He stood, smoothing out his jacket. I'll make you an offer. I shook my head. Not interested. You haven't even heard it yet. I crossed my arms. I already know what it is. You'll throw money at me, tell me to quit, and expect me to be grateful. But I don't want your charity. He chuckled, shaking his head. That's not what I'm offering. I hesitated. Then what are you offering? His eyes gleamed. A challenge. I narrowed my eyes. What kind of challenge? He smiled, the kind of smile that meant he was up to something. You prove to me that you can build something better for yourself, without running yourself into the ground. You show me that you have the drive, the intelligence, and the skill to succeed in my world. And if you do, I'll help you get the resources you need to take care of your family and go to school. I scoffed. And what's the catch? If you fail, he said, straightening his tie, you have to accept my help on my terms. I clenched my jaw. And what exactly does your help look like? You come work for me, he said simply. A real job in my company. You put that brain of yours to use instead of wasting it flipping burgers and lifting boxes. I should have said no. I should have walked away. But something in me, the same part that refused to give up, wondered if I could actually do it. Could I prove to him that I wasn't just some charity case? Could I beat him at his own game? And most importantly, did I really have a choice? I took a deep breath. Fine, I said. I'll take your challenge. His grin widened. Good. Then let's see what you're really made of, Jake. And just like that, my life changed again. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. My grandfather threw me into the deep end, testing me in ways I never expected. Instead of mindless labor, I found myself in his corporate office, surrounded by men in expensive suits, discussing investments, market trends, and numbers that made my head spin. At first, I thought I had made a mistake. I didn't belong here. These people had degrees, connections, and years of experience. I had 2 minimum wage jobs and a stubborn refusal to quit. But I refused to fail. I spent every waking moment learning, studying reports, asking questions, and proving that I was more than just a kid trying to survive. I worked harder than anyone else in that building, showing up earlier and staying later. And for the first time in my life, I started to see a future beyond just making ends meet. Then, just when I thought I was finally gaining my footing, my grandfather threw one last test my way. "This is your final challenge," he said one evening, handing me a thick file. "If you pass this, you win." I flipped through the pages, my stomach twisting. It was a proposal, a massive investment deal that could either be a brilliant success or a catastrophic failure. I swallowed hard. "You're giving me this?" He nodded. "It's your decision. You analyze it. You make the call." I felt the weight of the moment pressing down on me. If I made the wrong move, I wouldn't just lose the challenge, I'd have to accept his help on his terms. For 2 sleepless nights, I pored over the numbers, running calculations over and over, looking for any red flags. I double-checked everything, trusting my instincts. Then, with my heart pounding, I made the call. I walked into his office the next morning, placed the file on his desk, and looked him in the eye. "I'm rejecting the deal." His brows lifted slightly. "Oh!" I nodded. "It looks good on paper, but the risks outweigh the rewards. The company's debt is higher than what's being disclosed, and if the market shifts, it'll collapse under its own weight." He studied me for a long moment. Then, to my shock, he smiled. "Good." I blinked. "Wait, you wanted me to reject it?" "I wanted to see if you'd trust yourself," he said, leaning back. "If you'd make a choice based on what you knew was right, not what you thought I wanted." I exhaled sharply, realization washing over me. This whole thing, it had never been about money. It was about proving that I could think for myself. That I wasn't just another desperate kid trying to survive, I was someone who could succeed. I met his gaze. "So, does this mean I win?" His grin widened. "It means you just earned my respect, Jake." And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had truly won. I let out a slow breath, my shoulders finally relaxing. It was over. I had done it. For so long, I had fought just to survive, to keep my family afloat, to prove that I could handle things on my own. But for the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was winning. My grandfather stood up, walking around his desk until he was standing right in front of me. "You impressed me, Jake. I didn't think you had it in you." I smirked. "Neither did I." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You remind me a lot of your father." My chest tightened at the mention of him. "Yeah?" "He was stubborn," my grandfather said. "But he was also smart. And he never let anyone tell him what he could or couldn't do." I swallowed hard. "Then why did you two stop talking?" For the first time, I saw something real in his expression, regret. "Because we were too alike," he admitted. "Both too proud to meet in the middle." I wanted him to take the easy path, but he wanted to prove he could do it on his own. I didn't respect that back then. I took a deep breath. "And now," he sighed. "Now I see that I was wrong. Strength isn't about doing everything alone. It's about knowing when to accept help from the right people." I looked down, his words hitting harder than I expected. Then he reached into his desk and pulled out an envelope, handing it to me. "Here." I hesitated before taking it, flipping it open. Inside was a check, more money than I had ever seen in my life. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Your first investment," he said. "Not a handout. Not charity. An opportunity." I blinked. I don't understand." He smiled. "You proved you're capable of making smart decisions. Now, I want to see what you can do when you really have the tools to succeed." I stared at the check, my mind spinning. This money could change everything. It could pay off my dad's medical bills, help my mom, put my sister in a good school. But more than that, it was proof that I had earned my place. I looked up at my grandfather. Thank you. He nodded, his expression serious. Don't thank me yet. Let's see what you do with it. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was ready. A few weeks later, I stood outside the diner, the same place where my grandfather had first found me. Only this time, everything felt different. I wasn't exhausted from pulling double shifts. I wasn't drowning in stress, wondering how I'd make it to the next payday. For the first time in years, I had hope. I had used the investment wisely, paid off my dad's medical bills, helped my mom breathe a little easier, and set up a savings account for my little sister's future. But I didn't stop there. With my grandfather's connections and the knowledge I had gained, I started my own small business, a consulting firm that helped struggling local businesses stay afloat. It wasn't flashy, and it wasn't easy, but it was mine. And the best part? I was going to college. Not because someone told me to. Not because I felt like I had to. But because I wanted to. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my grandfather. "Proud of you, kid. Don't screw it up." I chuckled, shaking my head. Classic him. But underneath all his tough words, I knew the truth. He respected me. And in the end, I had proved something even more important. I wasn't just some lost kid trying to survive. I was someone worth betting on. And this? This was just the beginning.